The timeless appeal of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's prose fiction short story and novel series, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, is due to his absolute mastery of language and the realistic representation of Victorian London reflected within his characters. Many modern composers have followed in the footsteps of Conan Doyle, therefore leading to a proliferation of contemporary appropriations that affirm, challenge, and parallel the contextual values and paradigms originally depicted in Conan Doyle's stories. Modern manifestations, such as John Rawlins's 1942 film Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror, and Mark Gatiss's 21st century TV series Sherlock, shift the focus from the Victorian era to their respective eras to critique their social and political landscapes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born 22 years into Queen Victoria's reign. It was a time of immense growth, power and wealth for the British Empire, where people looked towards science and technology, which resulted in a crisis of religious faith. However, London became severely overpopulated, which led to poverty, homelessness, rural unemployment, drug abuse, and a severe increase of crime. London was a criminal paradise. Conan Doyle combated this with being one of the pioneers for detective and mystery fiction, thus creating the timeless characters of Sherlock Holmes and his associate Dr. John Watson. As a Stanford University article states, Holmes was grounded squarely in Victorian London. He represented the good, the bad, and the ugly of Victorian society, its ideals, its accomplishments, and its deepest fears. Conan Doyle depicted the ideal Victorian gentleman through Holmes, as he was a man of science, worked valiantly to protect social and class order, and looked clean and proper while doing it. He was the hero for the ever-growing middle class. Watson, on the other hand, served as the perfect counterpart for Holmes's extremes. Watson, as well as the audience, were able to marvel at Holmes's brilliant deductive skills, hence making him the narrator of all stories seem natural. We can see Victorian London clearly through Conan Doyle's detailed descriptions. It was a September evening, and not yet 7 o'clock, but the day had been a dreary one, and a dense drizzly fog lay low upon the great city. Mud-coloured clouds dropped sadly over the muddy streets. Down the Strand, the lamps were but misty splotches of diffused light which threw a feeble circular glimmer upon the slimy pavements. The yellow glare from the shop windows streamed out into the steamy, vaporous air and threw a murky, shifting radiance across the crowded thoroughfare. Intense descriptive language like this is all throughout his stories, and thus we can get a glimpse into another world. Arthur Conan Doyle wanted fame as a writer, so he chose to write weekly magazine short stories as he wanted the continuity of one character, but something that people could read even if they missed 1 week. Magazines, newspapers, journals and such became extremely popular as London was a place where literature was created and consumed in vast quantities. It was the centre of culture and commerce. Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror, directed by John Rawlins, was a film created in 1942 at the height of World War II and was based off Conan Doyle's His Last Bow. The 1940s, although mainly defined by the war, was a period of immense change for England, similar to the Victorian era. Technology advanced tremendously due to the war, and Britain was really the only European country withstanding Germany. During the 40s, the media was essentially used only for propaganda, and this film is evidently British propaganda.
For me, I'm British, and I'm proud of it!
Our country, England, is at stake.
An essay by Christopher Smith states that Holmes was the perfect vehicle for propaganda, and was now working within the spy genre as was required for maximum propaganda value. In Rawlins's film, we see Holmes and Watson having to deal with a more universal and realistic threat than what we see previously in Conan Doyle's stories. However, Rawlins parallels the intent of Conan Doyle by making Sherlock provide order for the chaos and fear that the war created. The composer also draws on the help of ordinary people to boost the morale of the public, although it's incredibly out of character for Sherlock to want help from outsiders. John Rawlins has drawn on the form of film noir, which was immensely popular at the time, to present Holmes as a spy rather than a detective. We can see this through the urban settings, close-ups, low lighting, high contrast, and the classic femme fatale. The inclusion of the femme fatale challenges the original Victorian context, as women were often portrayed as weak or victims in Conan Doyle's stories, whereas there was an increase of women in the workforce due to the war in the 1940s. We see Sherlock ditch his old-fashioned deerstalker and switch to a fedora, which is a symbol of the detective we see in the film noir genre. This also provides insight to the importance of image, which affirms the values originally asserted in Conan Doyle's works. At the end of the film, John Rawlins has used a quote from His Last Bow for verbatim, which truly shows the literary integrity of Conan Doyle's texts.
Good old Watson. The one fixed point in a changing age. There's an east wind coming all the same. Such a wind has never blew on England yet. It will be cold and bitter, Watson. And a good many of us may wither before its blast. But it's God's own wind nonetheless. And a greener, better, stronger land will lie in the sunshine when the storm is cleared.
Once again, Sherlock is placed on the hero pedestal, except this time he's not the hero for the middle class, but for the whole of Britain, or arguably the whole world. BBC's Sherlock has transported Conan Doyle's beloved characters into the 21st century London. While today's London is much more complicated than the one Holmes and Watson used to rule over, it is also much more accepting, therefore challenging Victorian concepts. This can be seen through the casual notions of a gay relationship.
Mrs. Hudson, how many times Sherlock was not my boyfriend?
Live and let live. That's my motto.
On the house for you and for your date.
Do you want to eat? I'm not his date.
And the discussion of Sherlock's condition. Critics suggest he's somewhere on the autism spectrum, Watson suggests
Asperger's?
and Sherlock,
I'm not a psychopath, Anderson. I'm a high-functioning sociopath. Do your research.
we live in a time of materialism and protectionism, which can only result to escapism. We see this through Sherlock's nicotine addiction. Gaddis uses neo-Victorian references through decor and costuming, juxtaposed with the use of technology such as smartphones, laptops, headphones, etc., for a nostalgic yet modern impression. Gaddis has also centered a lot of the stories around theft and the retrieval of information, as they relate to us today more than what Victorian crimes would. Unlike the other two texts previously discussed, the composer has portrayed Sherlock as not a gentleman, but as an outcast.
I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee.
Black, 2 sugars, please. I'll be upstairs.
Okay.
According to Alyssa Rosenberg, in her article Sherlock Meets the 21st Century, she describes Sherlock as the king of the modern nerds, thus showing the rise of nerd and fandom culture that we see today. Mark Gaddis has chosen to use the TV medium to parallel the way Conan Doyle originally published his stories, while also adding visual elements to the original text. Gaddis uses sharp camera angles and possibly fast jump cuts and zooms from one extreme close-up to another, overlaid with text and still images to reflect what it's like in Sherlock's mind when deducting. This is a very new perspective, as the original works, and most appropriations, use Watson as the narrator, and leave Sherlock's mind a mystery to the layman. By using these cinematic camera techniques, Sherlock's mind is visually represented. Women in this series are also portrayed as independent and strong, unlike the way Conan Doyle represented them. Unlike the other two texts, Sherlock has no interest in image, reflecting the growth of individualism in the 21st century. In a similar way to the other two texts, BBC's Sherlock represents him as a hero figure to some extent. So, what truly makes Sherlock Holmes so timelessly appealing to so many people? Is it the mystery and excitement? Is it the vivid view of the context and social paradigms? Is it Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's mastery of language? Or perhaps it's the fact that he's the most appropriated character in history, and we get something new with every portrayal. It's to no surprise that we see Sherlock in every modern-day detective, from Poirot to Batman, as he was arguably the first detective ever depicted in fiction. I feel, in my opinion, that it's only fair that Sherlock gets a shot at all these new exciting crimes enhanced by modern possibilities.